President Biden is reaffirming the United States' commitment to defending NATO allies ahead of his sit-down with Vladimir Putin this week. The NATO meeting is the second stop on his first foreign trip, following the G7 summit in England last week, where he insisted America is back at the table. In a joint statement, NATO leaders said they remain firmly committed to the organization's founding Mutual Defense Treaty, which states an attack against one is an attack against all. The president has been rallying European allies to form a unified front against China and Russia.
We're facing a once-in-a-century global health crisis. At the same time, the democratic values that undergird our alliance are under increasing pressure, both internally and externally. Russia and China are both seeking to drive a wedge in our transatlantic solidarity. We're seeing an increase in malicious cyber activity. NATO stands together. That's how we've met every other threat in the past. It's our greatest strength as we meet our challenges of the future, and there are many.
Following the summit, President Biden had what he called a positive and productive bilateral meeting with Turkish President Erdogan. Relations have been strained after the Biden administration formally recognized the early 20th century Armenian genocide and announced sanctions against Turkey for purchasing a Russian missile defense system. President Biden also consulted with leaders from the Baltic states and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg ahead of a highly anticipated face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin Wednesday. Mr. Biden expressed support for Ukraine to join NATO's military alliance. That will undoubtedly be a source of tension for his upcoming Putin meeting. Russia has annexed parts of Ukraine and continues to have a military presence on their shared border. Back in Washington, the Justice Department's top national security official is stepping down at the end of the month. The pre-planned exit of Trump appointee John Demers comes amid uproar over the Trump Justice Department's use of subpoenas to seize phone records belonging to journalists and two House Democrats. Attorney General Merrick Garland met with the leaders from major media organizations on Monday. He's assigning an inspector general to investigate the matter, saying, quote, "There are important questions that must be resolved." For more, let's bring in Zeke Miller and Marianna Sotomayor. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Marianna is a congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome to you both. Zeke, let me start with you. NATO, of course, was formed as a counterweight of the Soviet Union. What do Monday's meetings tell us about how its mission is evolving?
Well, this is part of a continuation of a broader evolution within NATO that has happened over the last several presidents. Some of this started in the Bush era, where NATO pivoted toward counterterrorism. In the Obama era, there was a focus on that, as well as cyber threats and other and threats from non-state actors. In the Trump era, there was a lot of talk about China. In the Biden era, what we're seeing right now is sort of an all-the-above approach. NATO is in the sort of put words in the Biden administration's mouth. They're sort of bigger and sort of it takes on a more expansive role. One of the things we saw out of NATO Day is that they view as one of their new battle spaces up there as well, in addition to cyberspace. NATO is bigger, more expansive. The alliance is larger, and that's how the Biden administration is trying to build sort of its leverage when it goes into that meeting on Wednesday with Russian President Vladimir Putin, with the backing of this larger, stronger alliance. That's the message that they are sending to the world as they head into that summit.
Marianna, it was interesting at a news conference late Monday, President Biden was asked about and weighed in on his predecessor's influence at home. Let's listen to some of that.
It is a shock and surprise that what's happened in terms of the consequence of President Trump's phony populism has happened. And it is disappointing that so many of my Republican colleagues in the Senate, who I know better, have been reluctant to take on, for example, an investigation because they're worried about being primaried.
You know, Marianna, it was fascinating to listen to that answer. How do those comments, you think, fit in to President Biden's often stated goal of bipartisanship?
Well, bipartisanship has been the issue for Biden. He campaigned on that. He mentioned it in his inauguration speech, and of course has even said earlier on in his term as president that the one thing he hasn't been able to do is bring people together on Capitol Hill. And that's obviously something that he's trying to do legislatively when it comes to infrastructure. But he does have a point in some ways when discussing that a lot of these Republicans on Capitol Hill don't want to have any kind of investigations or don't necessarily want to look back at Trump in terms of investigating him or looking at what happened under his administration. However, many Republicans, especially on the House side, you hear Biden talking about, as he says, it's phony populism. Well, many are actually running on that Trump populist message. It is something that House Republicans have coalesced around and said that that is actually the working class Americans is the group that they are trying to go after, and they really do see them as the winning ticket to be able to win back the majority. Of course, if that were to happen, talk about even making things more complicated for Biden if it were to be a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. But for the most part, Biden is still trying, when it comes to the one issue where they're trying to have those bipartisan wins, that of course is infrastructure. The White House still trying and hoping to see if Senate Republicans and Democrats will come together even furthermore on discussions on infrastructure, and to see if the White House would get on board with something like that.
Marianna, I'm going to ask you a bit more about that in just a moment. But Zeke, meantime, the list of people targeted by the Trump Justice Department keeps growing. We now know that not just lawmakers, their families and journalists, but former White House counsel Don McGahn and his wife had their phone records targeted. What can you tell us about Attorney General Garland and what he's doing to address that?
You know, he's doing about all that he can, which is to try to very quickly try to turn the page on that and say this was a relic of the past era. That's not entirely true, since some of this was obviously continued in the early parts of the Biden administration. But it's an attempt to sort of put it fully in the past. Some of that comes with that resignation of John Demers, who still runs for the next couple of weeks the National Security Division of the Justice Department. That's a sort of one sort of symbolic move. Making personnel change, but also referring this entire matter to the department's inspector general is another way of trying to depoliticize it, which has been a Biden administration goal for the Justice Department, but also a way for the attorney general really to try to wipe his hands on the issue so it doesn't cloud his whole tenure in office as well.
All right, Marianna, back on infrastructure. So as you laid out, talks seem to be tenuous at best. Where does Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell stand on the latest bipartisan proposal?
Well, he said that he's going to hear from his Republicans, try and understand what their point of view is on this and how far they actually get to the negotiations. But one part that has been pretty firm for him is raising taxes. He says he likely won't support any infrastructure bill that would do that in any kind of way. And it's unlikely that any Republicans, he predicts, would actually get on board if there are any kind of those tax increases. So as of right now, I mean, the White House, I don't think, is counting on winning over Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and that's likely how their position is going to be. They're going to try and find those 10 Republicans as best they can. But listen, Democrats here on Capitol Hill and also the White House have very much signaled that if Republicans and Democrats can't come to the table, they're ready to go alone and try and pass as much of this infrastructure bill as possible without any Republican support.
All right. Well, Zeke, what would it take for the White House to get behind this deal?
I think they need a little bit more information, number one. And number two, I think it's partly dependent on the atmosphere. They're trying to read the tea leaves, sort of where the American public is on legislation such as this. They know the American public likes infrastructure. It polls very well among both parties. But the urgency for doing it, and also where does it sort of rank, the urgency for doing it versus the bipartisanship quotient, and also just how big they want to go. I think all of those are the White House is trying to sort of assess all the different data points, and obviously looking at all the economic indicators as well. Just how much money can they pump into this economy right now, and continue to see the economic growth that they have seen without artificially slowing it down. All of those are factors the White House is considering. They're looking at the possibility. They would love to get that bipartisan win to a certain degree, because that would fulfill so much of what the president ran on and its promises to the American public. At the same time, somebody in this party are pulling him in the other direction, saying, let's just get this done and really stick it to Republicans so we have something to run on that is popular in the midterm year. So they're in a little bit of a bind within from a strategy standpoint. Talking to White House officials, they're going to spend the next week or two. Part of what they're doing here at home in Washington while the president's overseas is trying to sort of evaluate all those different variables and try to chart out a path for the next several weeks for how to handle this.
All right, clock is ticking. Marianna, Republicans are seizing on a conflict that broke out last week between progressive Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Jewish Democrats in the House. How did Democratic leadership react, and how is the GOP getting involved?
Well, there were really high tensions that Thursday when just moments after Omar put out this tweet, there were a number of 12 Democratic Jewish lawmakers who released that statement. And the progressives really took that personally. They saw it as an affront, something that, they didn't believe that their Democratic colleagues were necessarily there to stand by each other and very much ready to attack one of their own. So given those tensions, leadership did intervene and also talked to Omar and said that, she needed to clarify her tweets. It was not the position of the party, especially in the House, and that they would release a statement whether she clarified or not. So once she did clarify, you did see leadership put out that statement, but they're still taking the temperature because a number of Democrats are still somewhat annoyed by how the progressives reacted to this. You saw a number of members from the squad just going after leadership. Congresswoman Cori Bush went after those 12 Jewish lawmakers and accused them of being anti-black. A couple of them also saying and accusing them of being Islamophobic. So that was not well received by a number of these Democrats who were happy that Omar clarified and realized what had happened. So those tensions remain, and we're going to see how that plays out this week, especially now that Republicans are considering putting up a resolution to potentially remove Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Democrats likely to stick together, but again, there is some irritation there, and there's only that 4 very slim majority that they can only lose those 4 Democrats. So a lot of different developments can happen in the next couple of days here on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, but as you point out, really notable to see just how high those tensions really are and were. Zeke Miller and Marianna Sotomayor, thanks to you both. Really appreciate it.